Families of people on the spectrum? Okay, so that helps. I'm going to talk mainly about college and what's necessary for college, but the most important thing that I've realized about my presentations over the past few years is many of the things I'm going to talk about are exactly what you also need for employment. It's just we talk about it in terms of college skills, but looking at college as a means to employment. So I'm the coordinator of disability support services at UConn Law School. I've been there for about 21 years. I was the director of student services. I've now narrowed my position to just disability services. I work at...
Trouble hearing you.
Oh gosh, is the mic on? Is this better?
No.
No.
Is it on?
It's not that. That's, keep going. I'll adjust the sound.
Okay.
Do you want to pick it up a little higher?
Yeah, I usually have to eat these, you know?
But I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't want to grab your...
It's okay. Wouldn't it?
There you go.
No better, huh? Okay. I can hold it right in my mouth if I need to. I'm one of those that usually has to eat the mic in order to make it work. Let me know. I can also project. I wasn't using my teacher voice. Is that better? Okay. All right. I will let them yell if you still can't hear me. I work at Yale Child Study. I work with the Child Study team, but I'm the person who works with their college students. And thank goodness for all of us, places like Yale Child Study has started to realize that we need to work with people beyond the age of 18, because so many places, especially in Connecticut, have cut off services after 18 and don't leave us a lot of options. And the last thing that I do, about 15 years ago, some disability services colleagues and I started a group called College Autism Spectrum. This was at a time when people didn't know that students with autism could go to college. We actually started it close to 20 years ago, but we didn't incorporate until 15 years ago. But we started when people were still really questioning whether this was a reasonable thing to expect students on the spectrum to be at college and didn't know what to do when people were there. And now you really can't find a campus in this country that doesn't have students on the spectrum diagnosed and disclosed. Most students don't disclose, but that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So that's the professional part. The personal part, I have 3 children, the youngest of whom is a 23-year-old on the severe end of the autism spectrum. So he's not going to college. He is at, some of you may know BARC, the Bristol Adult Resource Center. He's at BARC and loving every minute of it. So I live on this end of the spectrum, but I work on this end of the spectrum, and I'm pretty good in between when I need to. Are we doing okay, DJ? Can I? TJ, not DJ. I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to keep going. I love having relaxed people around me. It's like you're living with a kid with autism, right? You got to be relaxed. That's why I always say I'm very flexible. I live with a kid with autism. I can switch at a moment's notice. Okay, so this is where somewhat we're going to talk about today, and this is where I usually like to start with professionals, because often I find that some professionals, not you in this room because you're used to this, but many college service providers especially have no idea what families have been through getting a diagnosis. They have no idea what it's like to get to this point and then coming to grips with the diagnosis. And as we all know, that securing services sometimes can be very easy and just fall into place, and sometimes can cause major family trauma. And what we're really talking about at this stage is making that major transition from parent as advocate and CEO of that kid's education to student as advocate and CEO of their own education. It's a huge transition, and the thing that we've learned over our 20 years of research that we know the best, we're not starting early enough. We have to start earlier. We know a lot of what goes on in elementary and secondary school, but then comes the big decision. Is he or she ready? Should there be a gap year? Should we take advantage of the 18 to 21-year-old programs? If so, what is appropriate? And then the search, getting and choosing either a college or the appropriate program. So we're going to talk about all of this and a little bit more today. What we do know is that at graduation it all changes. All of these things things change, and we're going to talk about them a lot, especially here, the expectations, temptations, and consequences, because these are the things that change the most along with the accommodations. So who's the driver in this? We all pretty much know that in high school, right up through high school, the parents and guardians, the teachers, and the counselors, the guidance counselors, the special ed resource teachers, any of the clinicians, they are driving this process. But in college, it's the student. And what I feel is missing is that link, that practice. If I have rooms full of students, I had almost 300 students Tuesday night, 300 parents Tuesday night in New Hampshire. And when I said to everybody, how many of you think your kid has a longer learning curve than most neurotypical students? Just about every hand went up. Even the students in the audience raised their hand saying, I have a longer learning curve than my neurotypical friends. But when I asked the basic questions, do you have an ATM card? Nobody raised their hand. Do you wake yourself up in the morning? A few raised their hand. Do you do your own laundry? Even less raised their hand. These are the things that really, in order to move from here to here, we got to have some things happen in between for these students who have a longer learning curve. So what all this is about is really entitlement versus eligibility, which is moving from high school to college, rights and responsibilities. The school has to initiate in high school, or the parents have to initiate through an IEP, but in college the student has to initiate. And then documentation, which we're just going to touch on today because I could do a whole 2 hours just on documentation for autism. Believe me, you don't want to hear that talk. And then the differences between some different institutions. And we'll talk about a few of those, especially in Connecticut, since I'm assuming everybody's from this area, but we won't do real specifics. Number one challenge. I get this question more than you would ever believe. All right, so Jane, we've got all this down and we've got the financial aid and we know where he's going. Who's going to wake him up? It blows my mind that you would consider even getting to the point of financial aid without doing the who's going to wake him up. It really does shock me. And when I say to families, before you even consider, there's a few things you have to answer, and that's the number one question. Are you still waking your son or daughter up? We go through lots of strategies then. How to? What are you going to do with the student who doesn't? And my first question to families is, do you really want to spend $10,000, $15,000, or $20,000 a year for someone who is not going to wake up to go to class? This is an issue. And I don't know if parents are seeing it stringently enough, and they want to then say, well, the college has to take responsibility for that. For all of you here that went to college, did anybody wake you up? I mean, it's very concerning to me that somebody, even at their sophomore year, is going to start talking about college having never woken themselves up. So I think that's one thing that, a very basis that we have to start talking about. The limited access really freaks people out. FERPA is the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, also known as the Buckley Amendment. And what this says is all information about a student going to college with or without a disability belongs to that student. Now, there's a myth out there, and you'll hear from parents all the time, I'm going to sign that waiver form and then the college can talk to me about anything. Number one, the waiver that's used at higher ed across the country allows us to call the parents if the student is being brought to the hospital or has some other type of major emergency. That's it. It doesn't allow us to call to say how Johnny did on his chemistry exam. It does not give the parents permission to call disability services and say, well, don't tell him I called, but how's he doing? We can't say a word. I would be walked to my car and lose my job that day. It's that serious. And I think people really think once they sign on that dotted line that they're going to get all the information. And I need all of you out there saying, it's not going to happen. Parents seem to be unfortunately comfortable with calling faculty. You know, gee, John got a 68 on this test, and I'm not sure if you knew about his accommodations exactly, but you really have to, what do the faculty do, honestly? The faculty call me or my equivalent at the colleges and say, Jane, or other disability service provider, get this parent off my back. It's your job to make sure the accommodations are right. I'm doing what you tell me. This parent can't call and tell me that I have to do something different. Parents aren't understanding the difference here. What about the vulnerability? I think that people aren't considering when someone says to me, well, you know, if somebody asks him for money, he's going to give it to him. Okay, well, we have to be concerned about that in a college campus. They sell things, they advertise things, they're going to get emails to buy things. If that vulnerability is an issue, we need to consider that. Courses that are waived in high school, I'm always reminding people that jump to college, there is no special education in college. Colleges do not waive courses automatically. The faculty at every college determines the curriculum, and they do not have to change it. There are some schools that under certain circumstances, they will substitute one course for another. But most of those schools, even the schools in Connecticut, you have to flunk a course several times and pay for it before you get a substitution. So you want to know those things before you make a decision. If you know you've got a student who absolutely can't do foreign language, who absolutely can't do math, it's very hard to get these substitutions. I went through that with my own daughter, with a learning disability, who needed a foreign language substitution. And her college was very clear that she had to flunk a course twice prior to getting a substitution. And we had to pay for that class twice.
Plus it affects the GPA.
Of course, everything. But they can set that standard. I can't tell you how many parents say to me, but that's illegal. No, it's not. They can set that standard. This is not special education. If that doesn't meet your need, you got to find another school. That's the issue. That's when families start getting to maybe we shouldn't have taken the diploma. Maybe we should have gone for that gap year, 5th year senior, 18 to 21-year-old program, or even one more year. And now, thank goodness, there's a group of us out there stomping around the country telling all these young entrepreneurs, start some really good gap programs for our folks. We need some really good experiences that don't cost $50,000 to $70,000 to give our students a chance for another year of maturity, another year of development, and give us something really good. I don't feel like there's anything really good out there yet for the students on the spectrum, but at least some things are being developed. And we know about some now that we can send students to and say, go do this for a year. You can apply to your colleges, defer, but let's give you a year before we have you move somewhere to campus. Yes?
Where do you get that though?
You either go on our website or you call me. It's kind of interesting. It's very interesting that you say that. I helped start a lot of these programs, but in the contract that people write with me to start these programs, they say you will not advertise our program or put it on your website, because there are some of them they really want to start for students in general or for students with disabilities in general, and they know with the numbers right now their program will be more than 50% students with autism if it gets out on certain autism lists. So
call you directly for these classes?
oh, sure. I'm going to give you contact info at the end.
Okay.
Not a problem. Absolutely.
This call,
Oh, I keep on our website, I keep a list of all the college programs for students with autism and GAP programs and summer programs. I haven't put this year's summer programs up. I'm still negotiating with people to let me put them up.
This program called a GAP program?
We call it a GAP A GAP year is sort of the common terminology. Depends where you are in the country. In Connecticut, they usually call it a gap year.
Okay.
When students apply to college and decide they want to wait a year, and colleges want to know what you're doing for that gap year. So there's a number of gap year programs. Some of them are
Down
at...
by where you are on the spectrum?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Are the programs broken out, like where the child is on the spectrum?
Oh, we're not even close to that yet. We're still making sure there are programs out there, but most of them are not for like kids like my son. They're not for the severe kids. These are for the kids who might be going on to college, or they're debating if they're ready for college, so they have to be pretty high functioning. And then, because some of them, like one of them that's just started, that's halfway across the country, but they travel. They're doing international experience, and they go in September to December, they go to 4 different countries. And that's wonderful, but if you've got kids that can't transition, you know, so it really depends on the kid. Now, it's a wonderful idea for people to have a chance to grow up a little bit, and for a lot of people with disabilities, especially if they have any social anxiety or an autism spectrum disorder, they never had that opportunity of, hey, let's go away for the weekend. You know, I've got my mom's car, let's go to the beach. You know, they never got to do that interpersonal thing with friends, so doing something like this is a really cool opportunity if you can keep transitioning. Am I having problems? I'm okay. Just keep going, Jane. Just, yeah, okay. Hi, welcome. Come on in. Yes, go ahead.
These people that are running it, I guess you're calling them mentors who are taking them.
Oh, not necessarily. It depends. Some of them have, you know, 1 or 2 people running it. You know, it's not like a 1-to-3 or 1-to-4 ratio. I mean,
The question is, have they had some sort of education on what these kids might be like or what their needs might be?
some have, some haven't. Some are just starting these GAP programs, and parents sign their kids up never saying they have autism. And then suddenly the programs are like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Because they can't discriminate against allowing the student to come in, but once they're in, depending on what kind of program it is, you don't have to accommodate. You know, I get a lot of those phone calls, but don't they have to? It's against the law. No, this isn't special education. You know, they can offer these services, but they don't have to. So yeah, it depends. We don't have a program yet that's just for students with autism. There are a couple out there, but they're more like camp programs. They're not real gap year education programs. So we really need to look at who's in charge, because up to now, this is what we hear a lot of. You know, my teacher really ought to. My parents needed to look into this for me so I'd be ready. My counselor didn't give me that form to sign up for classes. And we really need to change this to, I have to. You know, like this week at UConn, this week coming up, it's pre-registration. I can't tell you how many parents on listservs send out that information. You know, it's pre-registration at UConn. You have to make sure that, you know, we register for the kids, or that they, and that is so wrong on so many levels, you know, that we need to make sure that the students know, did you read that email about pre-registration? Do you know when your registration time is? Do you know that you need to see your advisor to have any bars lifted on your transcript before you pre-register? And then do you know what you're going to pre-register for, what your next semester is going to look like? Now that's a lot of executive functioning, advanced planning. There's lots involved. And yes, it's difficult, but if the student goes to Disability Services and says, I'm going to need some help with this. I've never done this before. I'm a first-year freshman. I'm not quite sure what to do. Can somebody help me? They usually will find someone to help the student, but it shouldn't be mom long distance registering for the students and making their curriculum and calling the advisor to ask them to lift the bars on the transcript. And we're getting way too much of that, specifically with students on the spectrum. And I think that's what we need to switch to, the I pieces. So how is this different? And I'm just going to go through this very briefly, but what we've really found over time is our students in high school are booked about 12 to 14 hours a day. From the time they leave in the morning till they go to school, they have all their activities, all their therapies, everything that has to happen in a high school kid's life. Then they come home. We hope they have a couple hours of homework. By then it's 9 o'clock at night. So that they've had 12 to 14 hours a day pretty much structured. They have frequent quizzes. They're taught from a textbook. So their exams are from a textbook. And usually classes in Connecticut, most districts are around 20, 25 students, and most are in one building. Now you move on to college, and where you were structured for 12 to 14 hours a day, you're now moving to structure 12 to 15 hours a week. And for some students, the majority of our neurotypical students are saying, yee-haw, 10 to 2, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, no class, yes. And our students on the spectrum are saying, what do I do Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 to 2? Because they need that structure that was provided right here. Come on in and join us. Hello. It's that big jump that is really challenging for a lot of our students who then don't know what to do with their extra time. We expect them to spend a lot of time outside of class on what they were working on in class, and you may only have 2 or 3 cumulative exams. And the difference is, and I wish I had it with me, got a beautiful, eloquent email a couple weeks ago from a really kind bio professor who's working with a student that I'm working with at a university in another state. And he said, what I don't understand, Jane, is the student is so bright, and he'll come into my office with tons of flashcards that he's developed from the textbook, and he's got all of those memorized. But when I tell him that to be successful on my tests, he has to integrate that information from the flashcards with the information from my PowerPoint points, with the information that I've given them to research, and possibly with some optional readings. When I tell him to put that all together, he can't pass my tests. What can I do to help him? I wanted to say cure autism, but I thought that was a little too much to ask the bio professor. And I explained the neurodiversity and how people think differently, and how he very, very eloquently pinpointed exactly the problem in this transition. Some of our students can be brilliant when we give them the information, they learn it, and give it back. Some of our students really start falling down when we ask them to integrate information from lots of sources, synthesize that information, and then take it and possibly generate alternate solutions. And that's what college is often all about, is generating alternate solutions, which can be a real problem. So you often have really large classes too, which some of our students have a difficult time with. Some love the anonymity of being in a 400-person lecture hall, and you have the entire campus. This is something that I think you'll find very interesting. Let me see, I may have broken it down. No, I didn't. Sorry, the type is small. This is from a federal grant from 35 years ago, 1979. Actually, the year I graduated from college, if you can all do the math real quick. In 1979, they looked at this called Technology for Transition. It's from SUNY Buffalo, State University of New York at Buffalo. They looked at thousands of college students and broke it down into what do people need for major skills, major skills for beginning college students. Classroom prep, social skills, and independent living. It looks like these are IEP goals for a student with autism. It's amazing to me that these were written for neurotypical. Study habits and other academic skills, be prepared for class and timeliness, which they had in caps, organized, and understand classroom etiquette. I mean, honestly, this could be, and so what we suggest is people look at these as IEP goals for transition. These are really good transition goals. Social skills, interacting appropriately, interacting in social situations, dealing with criticism, feedback, or rejection, which we know a lot of our students struggle with, peer pressure, drugs, drinking, and dating. I love to use this with the students, because especially the high school students, somebody usually says, people were doing drugs in the 70s? And I want to say, oh, you have no idea. Never mind the 60s. Independent living skills, structuring the environment, using leisure time, knows and articulates medical needs, and basic ADLs. This blows me away that 35 years ago, exactly what they were looking at for all college students to be ready to make the transition to college is really what we're looking for 35 years later from our students on the spectrum. Of course, from all students, but especially these, when you look at use of leisure time and structuring your environment, being organized and prepared for class, when I take the liberty of adapting this, the only thing I add is reading email. Reading and using email appropriately. Yes?
Do you have any of this as a handout?
That's the hard.
All this still.
Don't write. That's the hard part. All of this is copyrighted because it's in our books, and that's why I can't give it out to you. That's why I'm not allowed to. My publisher keeps me on a really short leash because we used to just hand it out, and they were getting very upset. So yeah, it's all in our books. You can Xerox it. They have one of the books here in the library. Okay. You can copy it from there. It's all in there. I wish I could. My life would be much easier. So let's talk about college success, because if I had a nickel for every, and I get at least, I don't know how many of these phone calls a week, at least 10 if not more. But Dr. Brown, you don't understand how smart he is. My son or daughter is brilliant. We just have to find a good college that can challenge him or her. And what I want to say, and I don't, but what I want to say is yes, and that in 225 will get you Starbucks, but I don't say that because really the problem is academic ability. We did a whole lot of research a couple years ago. And some of our best and brightest don't make it past the first semester. We all know those really bright kids who just didn't make it at college for whatever reason. What's really important is resilience. And I'm going to go through that in a minute. Social communication and interaction is after that. Executive function, which we know our students have a hard time with. Self-regulation, again, a sore spot for our guys. And academic ability. You have to have some academic ability. But we have all seen many people who have much more moderate academic ability do infinitely better in college and beyond than some of our best and brightest. And that often is just the case for students on the spectrum. So let's look at resilience. There's lots of definitions, but I like the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or having toughness. It's not a trait that people either have or do not have. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone, and I think that's the important piece. So what do we know about resilience? And this is from that incredibly academic website, psychcentral.com, the People magazine of psychology. But I like this because I think it spells it out, and I love to use this with parents because I think it drives some of these points home. Look at number one. Again, this was not done for people with disabilities. Just in general, how do you build resilience? You don't accommodate every need, and you don't eliminate all risk. What do we tend to do with our kids in special education? We want to accommodate every need. That kid can't fail. We're keeping that net really tight, and we want to avoid any risk. We not only don't teach problem solving, but what I find in the schools that are really good, where that student has a champion somewhere on campus who really understands how that student learns and has good staff, clinical, and resource people, they not only don't learn to problem solve, but everything's kind of taken care of behind the scenes. Oh, gee, you know what? Sue has to take that exam at 1 o'clock. Oh, but you know what? Choir is rehearsing. You know what? Let's just tell her she'll take the exam at 2 and I'll make sure she walks to this building. Okay, you going to talk to her? Yeah, I'll take care of it. Sue never gets to learn problem solving. So the first time she gets to college where there isn't that big staff of people helping to structure Sue's day, Sue runs into these problems and falls apart. What am I supposed to do? I can't be in 2 places at once. Where a lot of our high school kids right now have that opportunity to have that meltdown and learn what to do because they are so busy with so much of their lives. So sometimes our champions are just going the wrong way for our students. They need to involve the student in all of that planning. Teaching concrete skills, I find that sometimes that's not happening, especially at home. And believe me, I walk in everybody's moccasins on this. It's hard to do. But making sure these kids have the skills and then avoiding why and asking how. And let me give you an example. We worked really hard for a student to get a very complicated accommodation for an exam because she was having some certain problems, and it was chemistry, and there was going to be experiments, and there was going to be practical stuff and written and in class, out of class, one of these nightmare exams for disability services. And so talking to the student, talk to the professor, the 3 of us talked together, day of the exam, I'm all set, I've got my rooms all set up, and I get a phone call from the professor, she didn't show up. yeah, everybody's face kind of did what I say it now, my heart still goes like, what do you mean she didn't show up? You know? I took several breaths, said what I needed to say in the privacy of my own office, and then called the student and said, where are you? Oh, I overslept. And I said, everybody went to quite extremes to get this accommodated for you. And she said, I know, but I missed exams in high school and I just got to take them later. And I thought, and therein lies the problem. And I said, but instead of doing what I wanted to do, I know what I would have done at home. My mom voice would have come out and I would have said, why did you do this? Why did you miss that chemistry exam? When really what we need to do is turn it around and say, okay, this exam was worth 30% of your grade. How are you going to recover from having missed 30% of your grade? Because now you're starting at a 70 in the class. And the student said, well, no, I'm just going to go talk to the professor. I'll take the exam. And I said, yeah, I would like you to go talk to the professor, but I don't think you're going to be taking this exam. And she didn't. He didn't, thank goodness, didn't allow her. I know a lot of professors who would have caved because they would have been afraid that the parents were going to start calling and all of that. Same thing as high school. But the important thing is asking how. How do we get students to get a little tougher and resilient? Instead of asking, why did you do that, ask, how are you going to solve it? And take that judgment piece out. We don't want to provide all the answers. The worst thing I could have done at that moment is say to Sue, I want you to call the professor and tell them this, I want you to do this, and solve the problem for her. I needed her to try and do it, but said to her, if you're struggling and need support, please call me and I will try and help you. But I can't solve it. But we need to avoid talking in catastrophic terms like I easily could have done in this situation. What I find more with families on the spectrum, and for those of you who have kids on the spectrum, please do not be from 7th grade on saying, well, if you keep doing that, you'll never get into college, because I hear it way too much in my offices and on the outside. We cannot do that. Please let your kids make mistakes. Don't try and save them. Help them manage their emotions. Don't take them away. But we also have to model resiliency. The way we react to even big crises is part of how our kids are learning to react to a crisis. So because our kids on the spectrum, they may not notice social things as much, but they can feel how we're feeling at a different level than we can. So we really have to be resilient in certain ways. Questions, anyone? This has been research that we've been doing for a couple years specifically on students on the spectrum, and we've found it to be not only interesting but incredibly useful in the feedback we're getting from students. How come some students can persevere when others just cannot? The first stumbling block, they just fall apart and they don't have the resolve to keep going. Where other students, you throw barrier after barrier in front of them, autism or no autism, and they just keep going. In a very appropriate tone at the appropriate time. When I asked a student last week how she kept going when she kept getting lots of rejection in her life, whether it was grades or social or other things, and I said, how come you're so good at this? What are you doing that makes you able to keep going? And she said, it's an important thing I learned a long time ago, Jane, in rather a robotic voice. A very important thing I learned a long time ago. The people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter. And I said, that's a very good thing to live by. And she said, are you kidding? I have to, because a lot of people really mind me. And I said, okay, but if that's what gets you through. But that made sense to her, and she used it appropriately at the right time. So, questions, anybody? I've found this stuff so interesting because resilience is talked about more and more. And when I look at not only college students, but when I look at employment, both in applying for jobs and in keeping jobs those first couple years, the resilience piece is really interesting. We're doing a lot of writing in this area. So we know that reasoning is really a crucial key in colleges, and we know for that you need something our folks on the spectrum can be kind of weak at, is that cognitive flexibility, the use of logic and sequence, abstraction, and then really where a lot of college courses come is that inference and insight and creative problem solving. So we know that some of this is going to be a struggle for some students, but I was in Wisconsin last week training some faculty, and an English professor said, I want some very specific strategies on how to teach writing for students on the spectrum. It's like, oh, he asked the easy questions, huh? And I gave her a few strategies, but then I said, you know, you have to remember that many people today who are math professors weren't great at English. And many of you English professors weren't great at science and math. Our students on the spectrum aren't necessarily going to be across the board brilliant. So we don't have to expect that. And there's many classes that we will say to the student and encourage them, we're going for the C. Let's just get a C. It's a general requirement. You have to get through this. Just go for the C. And that's okay. For whatever reason nowadays in high school, that is so not acceptable. You know, because they'll never get into college, and oh my gosh. Well, why would you want them to get into that competitive a college if they really struggle with writing or if they really struggle with math? Let them go somewhere they're comfortable. You can tell, I think a lot of this stuff has just gotten totally out of hand. We know college success really depends on executive function and self-regulation, but for our students on the spectrum, the anxiety gets in the way of that. So a lot of what we know is that before they go off to college, whether they're living on campus or not, they really need active coping strategies. They need to know what they're going to do when they feel that feeling that all of us feel at some time, you know, when you feel it in your gut or in your toes and it just starts coming up and you know that you're just about to be debilitated with anxiety. What does that person do? And do they have it either in their head that they can call on it even when they're anxious, or do they have it written down somewhere? Do they have it written somewhere that they can get to quickly? We usually recommend to folks that they have a binder with all their important things in it. And we keep, in our programs for students on the spectrum, we keep a copy of that binder in our office because we know it's going to get lost. And that's very valuable information to the student and to us. And that has a lot of key phone numbers and emails. It has things like the strategies, what to do when. It has what we call safe people and safe places. If you're in multiple buildings on campus, who is your person in that building so that if you're really feeling overwhelmed, you can go to that person. That person will either talk calmly to you or that person will leave their office and let you chill out for a little while. We know our safe people on campus either have a family member with autism and really get this, or they've lived with autism in some respect for a while and they understand why someone might need that. So we have all these different strategies for students so that they can function when they're not at home or in their own safe place. And we use lots of strategies. Shall I talk strategies, or are you not interested in this stuff?
Strategies.
Strategies, yes? Okay. We found that one thing that is really, really interrupting college success is that whole executive function piece. That ability, the ability to plan forward, the ability to make sure you're not only getting everything done, but that you can figure out what has to be done next in order to be successful. So what we've found over time, we love whiteboards. We use whiteboards everywhere. We use them in our offices because we know our students are very visual. And in higher ed, we do a lot of what I'm doing right now. We talk at you like crazy. We will talk at you. We talk at you in lectures. We talk at you in the hallway. We talk at you over an audio in the computer. We just keep talking at you. So we like to make it more visual. So we put whiteboards in our offices so that as we're talking, we can document so that the student has something. And then, if we need to, we can either write it down on a piece of paper or email it to the student. We used to use, before we could get whiteboards everywhere, we'd use this. This didn't do any good to rip off and send with a student. You know, it was like, yes, go ahead.
Are there like personally owned whiteboards that you can,
I'm sorry?
do you know of any personally owned whiteboards?
Oh, sure, that's what our students have, the little 12 by 12 that you get at Staples. Yep, the little,
Staples?
oh, yeah. That's how we, yep, and that's what, we have the bigger ones in our office just so people, like right now doing pre-registration planning. You know, I'm doing semesters, helping students look at, you're taking this now, this is what you need to take over the next 3 or 4 semesters, let's look at what's offered each time, so I can divide it into semesters and make a visual. But for a student's house, say for, most of you are with high school students, yes? Yes, middle school? I'm not getting anything. Okay, middle school, yeah? High school, okay. What I ask parents and what I ask teachers to tell the parents, 3 whiteboards, the little ones, 12 by 12, 1 in the bedroom. No more than 3 things. The brain can hold 3 things. Try it when you're in the grocery store. Add the 4th thing and you're going to forget something. If you just do 3, you will bring those 3 things home. The brain can hold 3 things. So in the bedroom, something like take a shower, brush my teeth, put on clean clothes with the old clothes, with the dirty clothes in the hamper. Whatever it is, whatever it might be for your student. In the kitchen, it says something like dishes in the dishwasher, take your meds, make your lunch. Mom is writing these and student is checking them off each day. Okay? By the back door, that door where the student leaves for school, where the backpack is, the 3 things they need to remember. Bring the form to the guidance counselor for the school trip, homework for the math class, money for lunch or a lunch, whatever it is. Whatever it is. Mom writes them, student checks them off. Okay, and this whole process can take a year or 2. The student just checks it off to begin with. The next phase, once the student has mastered that, because what we're doing is taking mom, which we know mom is as the prosthetic frontal lobe, we want to take that prosthetic frontal lobe out and get the student to use their own frontal lobe, that executive function piece. So by taking mom out from doing do you have your notebook? Do you have the lunch? Do you have we're trying to get her to back out. By doing this, mom can see that it's checked off and we've taken that prompter out. Now, second phase is the student, with mom's help, decides what to write. The student still checks things off. But the second phase, the student and mom decide on the 3 things to write. And when that is mastered, the student writes their own things. Now, when I have the opportunity to start working with someone early enough and start this process, by the time they get to college, they will usually fight me on the whiteboard the first semester. Is there a problem? I'm sorry. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing something wrong. The first semester they will fight me. I don't need that, I don't want to be different, nobody does that. After the first round of exams, usually if I'm Skyping with a student, I'll say, well, what do you have to do? Well, here, I'll show you, and they just turn the screen around and show me their whiteboard. And usually they have I usually tell the college students, 1 over your desk, so that you have quick reminders of what to do, 1 the door before you leave your room. Bring my key, bring my ID, whatever they might need. This is a lifelong thing. Many of us do it in different ways. I write notes and put it on top of the bag I carry with me because I'm old and forget things and I need a reminder. Right, lots of us use our phones. We text things to ourselves, we email. We're developing strategies for students who have been reluctant to use strategies. And they often don't want to take those strategies from mom and dad. So when they get to college and they see, gee, lots of people have whiteboards, this might be okay. It works well. Yes?
When you said whiteboard, I thought you meant the ones they have in schools.
Oh, you're talking about like a smart board.
Smart.
Yeah. No, not a smart board. Boy, we couldn't afford those 3 in a house. No. No, whiteboards, they sell them at Staples with the little marker. On the other end is a little eraser. You need a bigger eraser. Those little erasers don't last very long. Yes?
For what you're talking about,
into the smart board.
For what you're talking about, you might want to look at the boogie board sync.
What?
The boogie board sync.
Sync?
It's like a digital whiteboard, and you can store the information on your computer.
That's what I was wondering. Okay. Thank you.
I was considering apps.
Oh yeah, and then apps for the iPad and stuff.
We talk a lot about planners and calendars in college, and even in our freshman seminar course, just for students on the spectrum, their first assignment is to go to the bookstore, which we call the co-op, and buy an appropriate planner with a teaching assistant from the class. Excuse me. Students on the spectrum will almost universally, when I say, okay, are you using a digital planner or calendar or a paper planner or calendar? Let me see what you use. I get the same response almost universally. It's all in here, Jane. I don't need any of that. It's all in here. All the same. It's so remarkable to me. We use a computer analogy. Your brain has so much RAM. And in college, I need you to use all of that RAM for academics and your student organizations or your extracurricular activities. I want all of this minutia to be downloaded. So consider this paper calendar or your computer calendar your USB. You can enter it when you need to, but I don't want it just in your brain. Now, I know why I'm doing it, but I use that example because sometimes students will hook into that example more easily for me. Yes?
So I work primarily with high school kids for this type of thing, and I get called in to do assistive technology evaluations. And I ask that question all the time, and kids tell me it's just in my brain. It's
all up here.
And the team wants, assistive technology solutions, and I'm like, I can give you any solutions, whether it's you take a photo or you use this app, but
you have to use it.
Let's put the information in there, and there is no technology to prompt the student to use their technology.
That's the prosthetic frontal lobe or MOM. Yeah, that's
Right.
the...
And that's what the teachers will prompt them, and it's like, even if I just saw somebody and they want something complex, and I'm like, look, at least he's using the calendar on his iTouch to record enjoyable
Oh, good.
things.
Okay.
So he's
It's a
using
start.
something, so let's try to encourage maybe that he record one or two other things and develop that habit before we go into something
Right.
that's complex and multi-step, because he won't.
We try and get most of the students who are willing, and not all of them are willing, but when they're willing, we try and get them to use Google Calendar.
Right.
The majority of colleges are on Gmail, Google Calendar kind of setups with their computer system, and what works well with which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is group work, which is a nightmare for our students usually. But by having Google Calendar, you can share calendars with other people, and that way you can set up meetings if you need to, or you can also send that to, if your academic support person or your tutor is saying, when can you meet with me, you can say, well, here's my calendar, tell me what works for you, and you can send it to them. But not everybody's willing to do that, and I agree, it's hard. It took me, I resisted for a long time. I was so tied to that paper planner. Oh my gosh, I loved my planner. It was like security, but then I got to the point where I needed sometimes to be other places where I didn't have a planner with me, and I needed to just be able to pull it up on the phone or anywhere else. So it is an incredibly useful tool, but we have to get people used to using them, not only for college, beyond to that.
Right.
Because at work, you miss a meeting because you keep it all up here, and honestly, people are going to laugh at you. Like, what do you mean you keep it all in your head?
You lose your job.
Exactly. And that often is what happens to our folks on the spectrum. After working so hard to get something, if they're very rigid in their structure and routines, if you can't be able to accept some of these new kinds of strategies, it's a problem. Yes?
I don't know what the right word is, but do you see the most, or the best piece of computer, I was thinking, being an iPad, an iPhone? What do you see the most useful, I guess, for them to carry around?
All of the above.
Well, but what if they can only carry one?
If they can only have one thing, I'm going to use that awful answer, it depends. Are you taking notes? If you're not taking notes, then you can use a phone. It's too hard to take notes on the phone. If you have to take notes, you need OneNote on the iPad. But, I see lots of students that use a laptop. At college, a lot of people use laptops, and a lot of people are taking notes on their iPad. Or a lot of people use the Chromebook. It's not just iPads on college campuses, because a lot of people are kind of anti-Apple. So Chromebooks are popular, that new Google Chromebook, Google tablet. the Fire, the Kindle Fire. So a lot of people are using those. If you can only have one thing, then it's whatever you can, because a lot of students can't afford it. So yes, you want something that allows you to text, and so yeah, the phone is most useful because you got to have a cell phone in order for people to get in touch with you on campus. Remember when a lot of us, I know there's a lot of young people in the room, but when a lot of us were in college, you had one phone with a dial on it, I'm really dating myself, and in the room, and that was your dorm phone. Those don't exist anymore. Everybody brings a cell phone to campus. Exactly, me too. Yeah, me too. There was I was in an entire house with 125 people in one payphone, that little thing they opened and closed, and you just lined up outside of it. We're really dating. Yeah, one more question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The reason I'm asking it, my daughter goes to a residential program working on transition, and she is used to writing everything down because they never push past that, and she's ready to leave, and everybody's computerized. And they only allow her, it's a fight to get her to take one piece of this equipment with her.
Wow, okay. Where is she?
It's in Middleborough, Mass.
Okay.
And this has been my battle.
Yeah.
Because they're saying, well, she can have her iPad or she can have her iPhone.
Well, she'll adjust quickly once she gets to college and has the freedom to. It won't be an issue, trust me. She'll be quick.
She needs to make this her routine now.
Yeah.
You can't just all of a sudden she goes to college, and so that was my question.
Yeah.
So basically, I guess what I have to argue for is that all the kids use multiple.
If you can. Let's talk after, and I'll give you some suggestions. That's okay. No, please don't apologize. I'm going to go through laws very quickly for a minute because I think it's really important. And I need to tell you that I work at UConn Law School. I've been there for, I don't even know, 21, 22 years, something like that. I'm not an attorney. My doctorate's in education and psychology, so I like to say that as a preference, as a preface to this. So we're going to talk about the ADA, which we know of as the ADAAA, the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act, Section 504 of the Rehab Act from 1973, FERPA, which we've already talked about a little bit, the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, but not 504 plan. Okay, there's a myth out there that if your son or daughter is on a 504 plan that transitions right to college. That's a myth. I don't know where it started. I don't know who began that rumor, and it's so not true. And all of us all across the country hear it hundreds of times a year. Well, they have a 504 plan, so I know you'll do these same accommodations that they did. No special education in college. The 504 plan ended in high school. Section 504 of the Rehab Act has been around for close to 40 years. So that's a very different thing.
The
Yes.
accommodations at the college level is really dependent on the school, whether they offer it or not?
No, the accommodations on the college level are based on the documentation of the student. What someone like me, any disability services person, what we have to do is take the documentation that the student has, not an IEP, not a 504 plan, but the documentation of the disability from a psychologist or... I'm sorry?
Summary of performance?
That's in addition. We need documentation from a certified professional that looks at... I'm sorry?
The actual testing that was
Yes.
received.
We need that to look at what are the fundamental requirements. What does the student need for reasonable accommodation to level the playing field? So we're not looking at the fact that a student in high school mastered this objective 80% of the time. That really, we'll take it because parents seem to want us to have it. We'll look at it and give it back to them. I don't keep it in a file because that is no use to us. We want to know what happened in high school, but that we get from hopefully a good summary of performance. We don't see a lot of good ones, honestly. If we did, it would help tremendously, much more than an IEP. Because honestly, IEPs are written for all of you to be able to meet some very specific state goals. But let's face it, teachers in the classroom aren't pulling out the IEP every day and saying, let's see, what do I have to do for this student? I mean, that doesn't happen. So, our faculty or our disability services people are not going to use that for that purpose. What we do is look at the documentation. We're looking at specific testing. If you have very high testing in writing and all of your grades in writing are very good, chances are you don't need extended time for writing. If you have a processing problem, then we need to think about what you need for writing and reading, depending on where that processing problem lies. We look at different tests for the math. And then we look at what courses you're taking. This is course by course. We just don't say to people, oh, you get time and a half for everything you do for the 4 years you're here or 5 years you're here. We don't do that. We look at each class and what someone needs. Because what good does it do me if I give somebody time and a half if their visual processing problem makes it really difficult for them to take a multiple choice test and fill in a Scantron sheet? So that I need to know that ahead of time so that I can make sure and say any multiple choice exams, no Scantron sheets. That will be done by our office. You're going to circle the answer on the paper because colleges use a lot of Scantron sheets. They're easy to grade for hundreds and hundreds of students. So we do things very differently than what K-12 does. And that's the piece that parents need to understand, that they often don't when they make that leap. They think that whatever was done in high school is just going to continue into college, and I'm going to explain why it's not now. Right now, you're all living in this world of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is a federal law of entitlement with words that you all know much better than I. You have to have education in the least restrictive environment. It's a free and appropriate education, and everyone is entitled to that education up through high school, either 18 or 21. The people responsible are the parent and the school. They're the ones that have to make sure that this happens, and it ensures success, meaning you can't flunk out of special education. If you're really low functioning, then you have to find a program that works for the student. You cannot flunk out. So it ensures success in that it ensures that you can keep going until you get a certificate of completion or a graduation diploma. You can be evaluated in your school. Remediation happens all the time, and special accommodations, and it's based on diagnostic labels, those 13 federal categories. That's how the law is based, and that's a federal law. Once you receive that diploma or certificate of completion at 21, you now have moved into the ADA, or what we call the ADAAA, the Amendments Act. No longer special education. It's done, it's over. We're now in civil rights statute. All we're doing is leveling the playing field. Because everybody who goes to, let's say, the University of Connecticut, I can't say, well, you have a disability, so I'll guarantee you success. Oh, you don't have a disability? You're on your own. Because you're both paying the same thing for the same course. All I'm allowed to do, and actually what I must do, is level the playing field and not give unfair advantage to anyone. So I can't say, this is what will make you the most successful. I'm not allowed to do that. I have to say, you're the one that's going to decide how successful you are. All I can do is take the barriers down from you to the other students. And it's a very difficult thing to have to determine how much extra time is enough. Do you really need a note taker? Do you need assistive technology? And that's what we do. And we all get lots and lots of education all the time in this to help us. But the student's responsible. I can't walk up to a student in the dining hall and say, I see you're using sign language. Would you like me to get interpreters for your classes? Against the law. I can't do it. The student has to come to me and say, I need an interpreter. Okay, I need some documentation of your disability, which everybody laughs at. They're like, I'm deaf, Jane. Yeah. And I say, I know, but it's the law. This is how higher ed works. Get me something from your audiologist, and then we'll start coordinating interpreters for your classes. Same thing. I can't walk up to somebody who very obviously may be autistic and say, you need some support, why don't you come to my office? So it's totally based on the student coming. Well, you all that work in high schools know how that's going to go, you know? Mom is going to come when they have the first meeting, and after that the student's going to say, well, thank goodness that's over. I'm not going back there. I don't want to be the special ed kid anymore. I don't want any help. I don't want anybody to know I'm any different. I made Mom happy. I went with her, and I'm not going back again. So it's all very different. We base things on reasonable accommodation and level of functional impairment. So if you have a learning disability, I can't tell you how many students we see at undergrad. And I don't work at UConn undergrad. I work around the country at lots of undergrad schools with students with autism. I can't tell you how many students we see that say, oh yeah, I had an IEP. I got all sorts of accommodations. I never used them. My mom wouldn't let me take them away, but I never used any of them. Okay, well then what do you really need at college? I don't know, because I don't know what I actually needed. They just gave me everything. That happens so frequently that students honestly don't know what they need when they get to the next level, even though it's well-intentioned. And it has to be an impairment in a major life activity. Now, thank goodness 2 years ago, they added social interaction as a major life activity. Before then, we were kind of sunk. You know, we didn't have a major life activity for students. What do we say for students with autism? What is the impairment in a major life activity? It was things like reading, walking, breathing, you know, for all the physical and sensory disabilities. But now we have social interaction. So you see the difference. And I think parents need to understand this difference better, because special education ends here. And college, not everybody goes to college. And to go, you have to pay. So we can't say to one group, well, you're paying, but you deserve more. We can't do that. We have to just level the playing field. Okay? Questions on this? I know this is confusing, but really important. Okay. So documentation, and I'm only going to go through this briefly because I know we only have about 20 minutes left. This is how we determine accommodation. It validates services, and it has clear and specific evidence that the disorder limits one or more major life activities. That's the thing about documentation. And honestly, we do, especially at our professional conferences, we do 15 hours on different kinds of documentation. Everything from cerebral palsy to autism and everything in between, because we need to be able, people that do what I do have to be able to interpret all of that, both medical, sensory, and neuropsych documentation.
Is a child ever like too old, if they're still in high school, too old to be tested for disability? I mean,
Tell me what you mean.
my daughter's like she's always been right on the cusp, and now that she's older, we think she has more on the spectrum.
Oh no, we never look, we get adult diagnoses. We have people that aren't diagnosed till 30 and then come back to school.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have any limit on age, not at all. So your child's legally an adult in terms of information flow, but different campuses have different attitudes, so you want to ask. We talked earlier about that, signing that piece of paper. Oh, I'm going to sign that waiver, then they can talk to me. 99 out of 100 colleges are going to say, no, we don't do that. They're going to say, sure, I will talk to, I'm in disability services and I will talk to you if your student is present with me. I will never have a conversation with you without the student. And if you email me, if I reply, I will copy in your student. That really is, you know, and most people won't even reply. We're working with the student. The parents aren't going to college. It's a very different kind of setup. Thank you. Didn't even see it, Tom. Thank you. Yes.
Do you ever encounter parents that have guardianship over the student, even though
I had this question twice on Tuesday. Yes, increasingly, especially for students on the spectrum, we have parents who have guardianship. It's not recognized at any campus in the country, and it's been legally tested many times. It basically renders the student not otherwise qualified, because the basis of the law is, are you otherwise qualified to be at college? And with a student who has conservatorship, basically what those parents are saying is, well, they can't pick out any of their classes, they can't pay their bill, they can't make a decision on their own, they can't, okay, and they're in college because, well, what are they doing? Oh, well, they're so smart. Okay, but what are we doing here? We get a lot of that from parents. The community colleges, several will recognize it in a different way. I have yet to find the Connecticut Community College that will allow a student. Guardianship or conservatorship is basically in their shoes. You can act in the shoes of the other person. I have guardianship over my son. but my son's not going to college. I mean, his case manager from DDS just asked why he wasn't voting. I said, well, if he got the ballot and you put a pen in his hand, he might draw a circle with a smiley face, but then he'd be voting for someone by accident, so this just wouldn't be a good idea. It's that kind of thing, that same idea. If you have to have guardianship over someone, and you're doing it because you don't want them to, spend money at the bookstore or sign up for classes that you don't think would be good for the student, most colleges are going to say, we can't protect that. That's not what we're here for. That's not what higher ed is for. That's a state agency that does something like that. So I'd severely discourage parents of kids who are college eligible for going for guardianship. I have gotten probably every legal opinion qualified in the country, all of whom talk about it much more severely than I do. I kind of put it in nice parent terms.
So are there some students that are at the college level?
I'm sorry.
Parents have acquired the guardianship
Yes.
over them, and then it's just not recognized by
Yes.
the college.
Well, and it would be for what reason? It would be for what reason? Do they want to know if their kid goes to health services? Nobody's going to make that phone call. Or do they want to know if their kid goes out drinking? Who's going to know? I mean, you really have to ask why. Well, we want to be able to know everything that our student knows. Well, the university is not going to send emails about everything going on each day at the college to the student and a copy to the parent. When you really think about it, and that's what I try and get, because parents come to me and say, oh, no, and you must help us with this, and you must tell the college that they have to accept our... What's the goal? Because in my opinion, and I just went through this a couple hours ago with a family, is the goal a bachelor's degree or higher? In my mind, we still have thousands and thousands of students across the country with bachelor's or master's degrees, some even with doctorates, that are sitting home. Maybe playing video games, maybe watching movies, maybe just reading a book. That's really not the goal, the college degree. The goal is an independent, successful adult. That's what we want. That just having a degree is not the be-all and end-all, because we need that person to be able to work, we need them to be able to live in a community. Bless you. We need lots of things besides a couple letters after our names. But yet families seem to think, but if he or she can just get the degree, everything's going to be okay. If you get a degree and you've got no work history, even if you've got a 3.8, 3.9, experience tells us getting and or keeping a job is going to be really tough. Where if you've got even a 3.0 or 3.2, but you've got a couple pages of a resume where things you've done, you got a really good shot at getting a job. And trying to explain that, and I know families are worried, believe me, I walk that walk every day. We worry a lot. And yet, if we're not willing to allow that student to attempt to be successful, then really why are they going to college? And for a lot of families in Connecticut, they will say, because what else is there? We've got these day programs for our students who are really at a lower functioning level, and then we have college. And there really isn't anything in between. And I understand that, but we've got to, instead of doing it in a way that isn't going to help anybody, we've got to find a better way, if that answers your question. But it's a really common question now, and it concerns me how common it's getting, because it tells me more and more people are looking for this. That's the hard part. And the other hard part of it, let's say something does happen to your kid at college. Let's say he gets a bad cut or breaks his arm and they take him to the hospital. There isn't a hospital in this country that will say, I wonder if he has a guardian. He's 18, 19, 20 years old. There is not a hospital in the country that's going to stop and say, the student might stop and say, can you call my parents? And the student can call their parents. But a lot of what the parents are thinking is, if he gets into trouble, someone will call me. it's so far off the radar at college that someone would have a guardian that nobody would think of it. So it really doesn't, it doesn't serve the purpose parents think it's going to, and most colleges won't recognize it. So the student has to be otherwise qualified, and academic standards are enforced. We don't change the standards or the curriculum for a student. The faculty sets the curriculum, and every student that graduates from that institution has to fulfill those standards. The other important piece is conduct codes are enforced. So what I want to, and you have to be able to advocate with minimal assistance. So what I want to bring up in conduct codes, and I think a lot of you know this much better than I only even heard these words about 6 or 7 years ago, is manifestation determination. Familiar to some of you? Manifestation determination is this rule in IDEA that if a student with an IEP or even a 504, I think, breaks a conduct code somewhere in kindergarten to 12th grade, you have a manifestation determination hearing where if it's determined that the behavior was caused by the student's disability, the sanction is either drastically reduced or goes away. Manifestation determination ends with high school, and it doesn't exist in college or the real world. In other words, you're held responsible for your behavior. And when families call and say, well, you can't bring him up on conduct code charges, Dean Smith, he's got a disability. He's otherwise qualified to be here. He has equal access to our college and our curriculum, and he is otherwise qualified to behave as everyone else, and he is held to the same standards. So conduct codes are strictly enforced no matter what your disability. If you're blind, if you're deaf, if you use a wheelchair, or you have autism, the wonderful thing is you're treated the same. That's what all these anti-discrimination laws are all about. So it's hard for me when parents want to then use reverse discrimination and make it different, and I say, we worked too hard to get here. Don't do that to us and break it now. You know, I know you want to give your kid a break, but the reality is, both at college and out there, you behave in ways that you should be arrested for, and you get arrested. And our kids need to learn that sooner rather than later. So that part's really important. I'm not going to talk too much about this because we got like 10 minutes left. So what's reasonable and unreasonable, and we really need to make good choices. We need to make sure that we know, prepare, and make good choices. There's lots of different ways to do this. You don't have to go right to a 4-year university. You can commute for a couple years. The community colleges in Connecticut are fabulous, and they're the best deal financially. There's programs with additional support for students on the spectrum, and there's a lot of technical schools. We know that you should have a transition meeting and look at some of these things: the current assessment, strengths and weaknesses. Having a good summary of performance or an SOP helps tremendously. We need medical info, and we want to know about accommodation needs. What kinds of things did you get in college? And yes, we know that the majority of young people, especially the guys, without being gender insensitive, it's usually the gentlemen, but sometimes the women too. When we say, so what kind of accommodations do you need? Usually they will say, I don't know, ask my mom. You know, that's the line when they first come in. They learn that mom's not going to be here, we need to hear it from you. I had changed this for a different state, but Connect With, it's now called DOORS. It's no longer BRS, so the Department of Rehab Services.
Within doors.
Right now they're calling it DOORS. BRS is calling it DOORS. So as of this morning, I just left a meeting with them, but it could.
Department, BRS is within doors.
Okay, that's okay.
BRS just the vocational.
Okay, they're not telling us that. That's good to know. All right, connect with them. Connect with these ladies. For possible funding, I'm seeing less and less students get funding for higher ed, and I've seen less, it's drastically reduced for the past 25 years. So I don't give people lots of hope, but they still need to connect. And I tell people that in any state, it's really important. The student needs to understand their assessment. Don't hide it from them. The thing that troubles me the most is the parents who won't tell their kid that they have autism or Asperger's. And the student needs to know their strengths and weaknesses and practice disclosing. We don't want them kind of hidden while they're in high school and then they get to college and they're not prepared to do a lot of these things. While we're talking specific strategies, and I skipped it because we were doing some other things before, 3 accommodations that I see in high schools a lot that I'm finding real problems with when the students get to college. So I want to mention them. I strongly suggest to families that they pull these, I call them the big time accommodations, back as early as possible in high school. Number 1, my least favorite, the study guides. And I hear from lots of families, like, the special ed teachers love this, I know, but it really is true. I get so many first-year freshmen coming in going, okay, so who gives me my study guides? You make your study guides. I don't know how to make study guides. Well, you're going to need to learn. And I want to say, you should have learned like in 9th grade, but it is so hard for students to catch up with that big skill of what do I study when they never had to do it because somebody said, here, learn this. They said, good, I'll learn it, I'll give it back to you. I'm good. Well, that's a huge difference between that and here's all the books, figure out what you need to know. Please take the study guides away if you think a student is going to be going to college. Please. And if the parents don't believe you, ask them to call me. I will be more than happy to tell them all those stories of all the students who had study guides who then, now that student needs 2 or 3 years to learn how to study. So please, the study guides. Extended time for assignments. That is the product of students' demise when they go to college, and honestly, it's the rare college nowadays that will provide that accommodation. What we'll suggest to students is take a reduced course load, because if you're working on assignment 1 and you need extended time for the assignment, the class is handed in the assignment Monday night and is on to assignment 2. Well, you don't really get what's going on because you're still working on assignment 1. You now get assignment 1 in. The class is already on assignment 3. You never catch up, and it is an easy recipe for failure. I would much rather see a student take 3 courses rather than 5 and be able to keep up and follow the class rather than no, but I have to take 4 or 5 courses like everybody else, but I need extended time for all of them. It doesn't work, and we're losing too many students because of it. So that's a big accommodation that really needs to get pulled back. Okay, there were 3. What did I forget? I'll remember while we're talking. Study guides and, sorry. We usually provide note takers, but having some sort of, that's it, thank you. See, I knew somebody would say a key word and assistive technology. Students are resistant to it, but need to use it in high school. We use voice input, Dragon Naturally Speaking, all the time, and the students who can hit the ground running freshman year with it are so much better off. It's not expensive. It's a $69 piece of software. Many students' brains work better when they're going brain to mouth rather than brain to hand. And by taking that away and taking someone away from the screen with a simple Bluetooth, you can increase their capacity for writing greatly. It works great with ADHD students also, because then students can walk, they can do anything. It makes a huge difference if students can then say, oh, yes, I can write a little more easily, because then you've got a draft that you just go back in and correct. You're talking under $100 for multiple users, and then usually it's so useful that the student will buy it and put it on their own computer for home. That and smart pens. Are you familiar with smart pens? The pens that have a recording chip. Most students will say, well, I need my lectures recorded. Over 90% never listen to them again. If you're sitting through 12 hours of classes, are you going to listen to 12 hours again? With the smart pen, you can go to the place in the lecture that you missed, that you need repeated, and listen to that section again. That has been much more successful.
This is what they look like.
They're very reasonable now compared to when we started using them. Now it's about $129 at Target. You need special pads, 4 for $20. Can you tell we do this a lot? We buy lots of them. They do run out, especially if you use them all the time. You only need the 1 gig. You know, the students will say, no, I need 2 gigs. I'm going to fill it. No, you need 1 gig. You can dump lectures. You don't need to save them all.
You can download it to your computer.
Yes, very easily. So we got all of this, and am I harping enough on this? Your student needs to wake themselves up. Number 1, by the end of high school, they should be running their own IEP meetings, because really that's what they're going to be doing with someone like me. I'm not going to have an IEP meeting and I'm not going to grill them, but I'm going to say, okay, let's think about what kind of accommodation you need in this class. Here's how this professor runs the course. How would this work for you? So if that student, at least, I hear too many families who say, well, he comes for a few minutes to the IEP meeting, but then he leaves. It makes them too uncomfortable. That's really important. Scheduling their own appointments. You know, they're going to have to make that appointment with their advisor, with their professor, with me. So having some practice at home, let them schedule a doctor's appointment and a haircut, and let them refill their own meds. That's a college skill. A lot of this, the moms are just like, it's easier if I do it. I know it's harder to get the students to do it, but it's so important. Some kind of time management system like we talked about, and some sort of volunteer experience or a job. And if there's time and availability, taking an independent living skills class. But we have to remember we are not applying to college, right? A lot of parents already had their opportunity. This is for the students, because really college is all about getting ready to work. And if the parents are doing everything, how is that student ever, what, are they also going to call about the interview? I mean, for a job, you know, you really have to wonder when it's going to end. Some students can take their general education requirements at a community college. Sometimes the transition programs work. We talked a bit about the summer bridge programs. We find a lot of students do better if they take the first couple years living at home and get the academics down and then move on to campus. And additional community resources. I'm going fast because we only have a few minutes. I'm going to skip this, but the key questions to ask disability services are things like level of service and staffing. I'm a one-person disability service office at the law school. I'm not there today. It's something important to look at. If you've got a student that has pretty high needs, make sure there's an office with multiple professionals. At Storrs, they have 6 professionals and I think 12 half-time graduate students. That's a very different office than at the law school where I'm a one-person show. What kind of students go to this college, and what kind of admissions procedures? A lot of people are looking at the wrong thing. They're looking at what you need to get in. You need to look at what you need to get out, right? It's not worth going if you can't graduate. So you want to look at the school. If you know you have a student who's really not strong in math, don't choose that college where you need 3 or 4 requirements in math to graduate. If you know you have a student who's really resistant to writing, don't go to a school where all the literature says we are a heavily based writing curriculum and there is writing in every course. And a lot of places are going in that direction to beef up this generation's writing. What I want to make clear is that though curriculums can be changed in K-12, in college they are not. So that you don't want to commit to a school and then pay a lot of money and find out that this is really not a good match. You want to talk about tech and housing and transportation, and if there are special programs, a lot of the kinds of services that we've been talking about are above and beyond the law, so they are fee for service. So that if your student needs extra services, they will be fee for service. The stuff my publisher makes me do, I apologize. This is our first book for college personnel. This is our second book that I think they had a couple of here, The Parent's Guide to College for Students on the Spectrum. Sorry, the first one? Students on the Autism. I think actually this was changed by I think it's actually students with Asperger's, and since the DSM, I think they changed the cover. Guide for College Personnel. They're on Amazon if you just put my name in. Amazon? The Parents Book, and this is our 5-point scale book with Carrie Dunbar for adolescents and adults. Sorry.
That's,
Okay.
yeah.
And this is how you reach us in our website, collegeautismspectrum.com. And there's a link there that you can email me. So I know I'm only a couple minutes shy of, but questions? Yes?
That first, one of those pages at the beginning that you said was in your, one of your books, which book is
The parent book, the yellow one. Yes, that one's in the yellow book, because we suggest that people use it for transition goals. Other questions? Sure. Extended time for the assignment. Actually, if you go on Amazon and just put in Thierfeld Brown, there's not too many of us, Thierfeld Brown, all 3 books come up if you do that. And they're pretty cheap on Amazon. So I know it's 2:30. I'll hang around a few minutes. Yes, go ahead.
Are these books in the library here?
I'd like to think so, but I can't tell you for sure.
This one I think is.
I think so. I think it is. I think I brought a copy when it was first came out. Thank you all for all you do for students with autism. Thank you.